Hey guys, how you doing? So today I'm going to be introducing you to another CSS layout called CSS GRID. Um, do not forget that this particular video is a continuation of the Ultimate HTML and CSS series that we started about a few weeks ago, where I have dealt with HTML intensely. So if you have issues with HTML, you want to check that out, I'll leave a link in the description below, and you should also see one pop up right about now. And we also dealt with CSS, but we are taking it progressively. We dealt with, we had about 2 hours class on CSS, and we also last did CSS positioning. So in the first 2 hours class, we dealt with Flexbox, which you want to see as the opposite side to CSS Grid. So CSS Flexbox and CSS Grid are both CSS layout system. Yeah, with CSS Flexbox first and CSS Grid was then created. So today we're going to be looking at CSS Grid. As I said previously, we've dealt with CSS Flexbox. If you have issues using CSS Flexbox, you also want to refer to our CSS video below. Also going to leave a link below. And yes, let's dive right in. So, as I said previously, CSS Grid is just as the name implies. It's just you created a set of you creating rather a set of grids and making sure that they are aligned in a certain way and in a certain pattern. A grid being an intersection between an intersection of an horizontal line and a vertical line. Yeah. So the difference you might want to ask, when if I've known CSS Flexbox, why should I know CSS Grid? So the difference between CSS Flexbox and CSS Grid is that CSS Flexbox would enable you to do a one-dimensional kind of layout, while with your column and row, while your CSS Grid will allow you to do a multi-dimensional layout. And most of the time, if your grid system does not require you to do a lot of rows and column arrangement. This is real life now. You really want to go with CSS Flexbox if it helps you get your job done. If it doesn't require a lot of row and column arrangements, you want to go with CSS Flexbox. But if what you're building requires you to have a lot of grid, a lot of boxes of the same pattern repeatedly displayed, then grid is a better option for you. But at the end of the day, you really want to know all of this technology. You want to know how they work because they solve one problem or the other. So when you see that you're encountering a problem that CSS grid solves, if you do not know that CSS grid is in existence, then there is no way you would know that CSS grid actually solves that problem. So that is why it is pretty much important for you to know how the technology works. And the essence of this video is to help you know how CSS grid works in less than 10 minutes, hopefully. So let's get into it. So as we would normally do, I've created this last project we used in last video. So you can just, if you want to follow along, you can create a folder on your PC and open up the folder with your VS Code. If you do not know what this is, or neither do you know what this is, you can refer back to my very first video, second rather, that's the introduction to, or that's a complete HTML course. You can refer to that video. I explain how to get your Visual Studio Code downloaded and get your browser downloaded. And today I changed my choice of browser. Today I'm using Firefox. And the reason why I'm using Firefox today is because Firefox has some amazing inspect to components. And any browser works actually, but there are certain things I want to show you with grid layouts which only Firefox does have. So that's why I'm using Firefox. You can use any browser, it works. It works the same way. It's just for the sake of your understanding is the reason why I'm using Firefox. So let's get started. So I'm just going to I created a page, an HTML page, and I also have a CSS page, grid101.html, grid101.css. And I'm just going to start right about now. So I'm going to have just a little bit of um okay, I'm lazy. I'm just going to use a shortcut snippet HTML. By now I wouldn't have a problem using this snippet because I want to have an LD assumption that you know what all of this tag does. If you have issues with each of these tags, you need to refer back to my HTML tutorial if you have issues with all of these tags, but I'm sure you do not. So I'm going to have a div here called with class wrapper, and I'm going to have another div. Guys, there's a plugin on Visual Studio Code that comes by default. It's called Emmet abbreviation. It just helps you to get your work done faster. For example, if I want to create a div, it saves me from the open angle brackets and lesser than and closing lesser than. So instead of that, I just go ahead to type my div and I do a tab. Yeah, I'm going to do a video on. I'm probably going to do a video on shortcuts on Visual Studio Code just to aid your productivity. Yeah. So if I need about two of this div, I can just go ahead to do this times two, and it gives me in two places. These are just things that you need to extend your productivity and your ability to do a lot more work. This is another one. I need three columns of or four columns of a dummy text lorem times four, and it gives that to me. Once I save, I should have that in my browser. There you go. So I'm going to have the same thing here as well. Um, lorem. I want just two column. So this is a dummy text. Dummy text is just rubbish. It's just something to fill up my div. So I'm not doing anything special here. So let me increase the font of my program so you can see it. So I have my HTML, and in my body I have a div that serves as the wrapper, and I also have two divs that has dummy text in it, and you can see that on my browser. So the way the class is going to go is that I'm going to be explaining certain properties that you need to know in CSS Grid, how they are being used, and probably you begin to see if you've been if you've been building stuff, you'll begin to see how CSS Grid can really help you make your life easier when it comes to layouts and stuff. So let's head into our CSS. Okay, before then we need to link up our CSS with our HTML so our HTML knows about it. um I'll just do a link. There's another one here. You could just go for the CSS and do a tab, so it gives you everything you need for this. This actually is something that you should know. if you already know obviously what link means and what rel means, what href means. So rel is just saying, okay, I'm going to be linking a style sheet here, and href serves as where it is in the whole project. So I'm going to be opening our CSS file, and I'm going to be closing this tab. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be targeting the wrapper, which is the container, and before I do that, I'm going to be targeting the divs inside the wrapper. I'm going to be giving them just a kind of change in their background color, so we can I'm going to give them a gray color. With the aid of Visual Studio Code, I can hover on this color and increase that gray a bit, or I'm just going to give them a light gray color. All right, so that changes immediately. And let's also give a padding just to make it look, padding of 20 pixels. All right, that makes sense now. So let's see how the subject matter of the day works. So just as you would use Flexbox, all of these properties falls on your display because a way of they are a way of controlling the way your layout works. So to use CSS grid as well, you go into the parent box. And when I mean the parent box, I mean the div that houses all of the elements that you want to perform perform layouts upon. So you can go into the wrapper, which is that element, and you do a display of grid. So nothing happens here right straight into your eye, but in the browser a lot of things has happened. And the first thing that has happened is that that particular column, that particular box, that's the parent wrapper box, now has been turned into a grid. And that's what I was going to show you with Firefox. So if you open up your inspect tool in Firefox, you might not be able to see this in Chrome, which really does not have any effect actually. It's just for teaching aid. That's why I have it. So you would notice that if you select this, you would notice all of these grid lines. So it's just telling you that this particular line has been turned into a grid, and you would also see something like this just to show you how your grid works. Now my grid is in a row fashion, but that's not what I want. I want to have a main column, the main column by the side, and something that looks like a sidebar and the main article, that kind of thing. So the first property I'm going to be introducing us to is called the grid template column. So your grid template column is just a way of helping you align your elements across your column. Just as you have Flexbox and you have justify content where your elements spread around the column. You have space evenly, space between, and all of those. So you have this also, and it works pretty much the same. So I can have 70% and 30 30%. So what this basically means is I'm saying in my grid, I want the first box to take 70% and the second box to take 30%, and that's what's happening here. So you can see that the first box is taking about 70% and the second box is taking the 30%. which is like the sidebar, if you will. Yeah. And you can also go ahead to give a gap, which is usually called a gutter, in between your sidebar and your main content. So you can go ahead to say column gap. Previously, this was called grid column gap. So if I do grid column gap, you would notice that you will notice a strike through. So what that means is that the this particular property is obsolete. So it used to be an option previously, but it's currently obsolete. So now it is called column gap. Excuse me, column gap. So you can give a column gap of 10 pixels if that works for you. So immediately you see a space in between. If I remove this, you see a space in between your content. I can make this much wider so you appreciate it. So I mean, right off the bat, you're getting you're getting your layout work little by little, and it's beautiful. So you can as well have multiple. So let's repeat what we have here. I'll just do a copy and I'll do a paste. So you can see that immediately we duplicated our contents, it took the same shape. And that's the way it's going to be. That's the shape all of your content is going to take. That's the shape all of the content is going to take, as long as they are in that particular grid, they are going to take the same shape. And this shape is what you have specified by saying grid template column should be 70/30. So as long as they are in that shape, in that grid, the first box will take a 70%, second will take a 30%, the fourth 70%, no, the third rather 70%, the fourth 30%, and that's the way they are going to be in repetition. If you've seen a physical grid before, you would see that kind of structure whereby you have just a particular thing spread across the whole grid, taking the same shape. That's the concept of CSS grid as well. So you could also give it some bit of gutter in between each of the contents by doing row gap. We also have what's called row gap, and you can do 10 pixels as well. So you see how that looks. So it gives you a bit of space between your rows as well. And this looks repetitive, right? So instead of doing column gap, row gap, you could actually just do it in one shot by saying gap 10 pixels. And I'm not going to I'm not going to cancel all of these things that I'm doing because I want you to have all of this code as we iterate through. So I'm just going to comment them out. So yeah, you can see that your gap does nothing, something now. So your gap does the exact thing that your column gap, row gap does. It's just like shrinking all of them together and giving them a gap property. And by default, the arrangement of your grid is in grid template row fashion. Yeah, so what I'm saying is by default, without specifying, look at what your arrangement is. And this arrangement, because you have grid template column, you also can have grid template rows. Yeah, yeah, by default. So most of the time you would not usually use your grid template row because by default your element is arranged in a block kind of way. So we'll go with our grid column because most of the time when you're talking about layouts, it's really you spreading things through across your site. and and note that you can use order. You can go ahead to use order units as well. You necessarily do not want to use percentage alone. You can go ahead to use pixels as well. It's just that pixels is before you get that pixel value that spans through the whole of your web page, it becomes very difficult. And also when it comes to measuring width, it is not advisable to use pixel, because when you use percentage, it makes sense, so that when your screen size reduces, your your content can still take the percentage that you have set for that particular screen size. So that's why it actually makes sense for us to use percentage here. Take 70% of the screen size and take 30%. So even when our screen is shrinking to say a mobile view, it's still going to take 70%, and this is still going to take is 30%. So that's why you want to go for percentage most of the time. So let's also look at the concept of fraction. So you can also use fraction in CSS grid. Fraction is simply just another unit representation. Just like you have pixels, you have percentage, you have rem, you have em. Fraction is another unit that was introduced with CSS grid, just to make life easy. So in order to use fractions, let's create another. So I'm going to comment this out, or instead of commenting this out, I'm just going to create another page, and I'm going to link that page to this page. The reason why I'm doing all this is just so that when you have access to this code base, it makes sense to you what is going on. So I'm going to call this grid 102. Let's close this. So I'm just going to link. I'm just going to link this guy to grid 102. After all, we know HTML, so why not play with it? Grid 102. Oops. So we're going to take it out of our grid. Because it's in our grid, it sees it as equivalent to a box, so it has to also take that space. And you can see that that's why the effect of the link is that wide, but that's not what we want. That's a falsy behavior, so put it out of our grid so it doesn't obstruct us. So yeah, so grid 102, and in our grid 102 we're just going to quickly make an HTML file. Still our CSS grid. Makes sense. So let's go to our grid 102. Yep. And in our grid 102 as well, we want to be able to go back to grid 101. As I said, all this is just to help you understand what's going on with the code base when you're trying to make a reference to it. Grid 101. Yeah, so pretty much. So I'm going to make a wrapper. Don't forget what we're trying to do now. We're trying to look at how fraction works. That's what we're trying to look at. How fraction works. So we're going to make about 6 different divs. If some are going to have the same text on them all. Let's just do a copy and do a paste. Paste a bit more. Yeah, good. So we're also going to create a grid 102.css file quickly. So and we'll do a link. And we'll do a link and specify okay, so you can come and say give us a display of grid. Nothing is going to happen, but by now you can tell that that particular box has been turned into a grid. Yeah, so for our visual effects, so we can actually see that stuffs are happening. I'm going to give the boxes a bit of gray background, and I'm going to use CSS pseudo. I want them to alternate, so I want some to have gray, I want others to have light gray. So I'm going to say let the odd guys have. If you don't understand CSS pseudo selectors, just let me know in the comments below if you want me to make a video for CSS pseudo selectors. Let me know in the comments below. But these are not different from your over and all. I made a brief touch on CSS selectors, but I did not cover pseudo selectors. So but it's actually a thing you can quickly look up yourself. But if you need me to make a video about it, sure, why not? Let me know in the comment below. So let's get back. So I want others to be light gray. And let's see, what I did not apply. Oh, so we said grid.html ought to be grid.css. So yeah, immediately. So let's close the ones we're not using. Yeah, so it makes sense. So what I just did was I want my div to be to have a background of gray, and I want the odd numbers to have a background of light gray. So 1 is an odd number, so it has a background of light gray. 2 is not an odd number, so it has a background of gray, which is the normal color. Yeah, all this is just to aid your visual effects, just to help you see what's happening. So I can also just give it a padding of 10 pixels. So I can also give it a padding of 10 pixels. So it becomes pops up. So yes, let's now go into the business of grid. So I can do grid templates colon. So we could do percentage, but the essence of fraction is It's just so that it makes sense in our eyes. Um, because fractions is much more intuitive because you're specifying exactly how you want your colon, how you want your boxes, the amount of space you want each of your boxes to take. So it's just like you dividing, say for example, you buy a mango and you want to share the mango with your children, yeah, if you have any, or with your siblings. So you can take apple, rather I was going to use an apple. So you can take the apple and cut them into fractions. Now you when you cut them into fractions, you can now take each slice of those fractions depending on the amount of sibling or the amount of children you want to share the apple for. It's the same thing that happens here. So fractions gives you like a bit more control on how to really align and sort out the placement of your boxes, which you see. So if I say one FR, two FR, and one FR, what I'm simply saying here is for my colon, first thing is I want three elements to fill my column. That's what I'm saying here. I want three elements to fill my column. But the first element should take one. The second element should take two fractions. And the last element should take a fraction. So um, it is CSS, it is the browser problem to be able to interpret how that space should be divided. But if I save, you would probably have a clear idea of what I'm saying. So you can see it from here. Three elements should be on that particular column. Yeah. In order for you to really understand, I might remove every other element here so you can see just the three guys. Yeah. So it makes sense. It makes sense now what this does. So the first one is going to take a fraction. The second one is going to take double fractions. And the last one is going to take just a fraction. Yeah. So same thing also happens if I say 3. The browser knows how to share it amongst them, just so to make sense. Yeah. So if I say 2, 3, see how it makes sense. So the browser knows how to share. So this is why using fraction actually makes life easy, because you have much control on how to really display your boxes. So you can also end up going to say one fraction each. So I'm going to uncomment these guys, and that's why we have these old guys. So we can go ahead to give them gap of 10 pixels. Go ahead to give them gap of 10 pixels. And another concept I would love to introduce you to with grid system is what we call repeats. So many times when you have large boxes like this, you might have your one FR, one FR, one FR. So instead of doing one FR, one FR, one FR, you can use your repeat function. So I'm going to comment this out to say grid templates. You can use your repeat function, and you can say give me one FR repeated thrice. FR rather. So give me one FR repeated twice. So this that you have done here is exactly the same thing as this. So let's say you have a chunk of boxes that you want to repeat, let's say twice or 10 times. Instead of doing one FR, one FR, one FR, one FR, one FR 10 times, instead of doing that, you can just do a repeat function. It's just like your for loop in your normal programming language. So it loops it out and give you the repeated version. And you could do this as well. Actually, you could do one FR, two FR, and one FR. So what you're saying is give me one FR, two FR, one FR, and repeat it 3 times. That's what you're saying. Repeat this structure, this particular structure 3 times. And that's why we have one FR, two FR, one FR, one FR, two FR, one FR, one FR, two FR, one FR. So if you say repeat that structure once, it's, it's going to align out. So that's about repeats. And another thing I was going to call your attention to was a function called grid. You can also do grid auto colon. So you also have grid auto colon and grid auto rows. This both function helps you to manipulate the sizes of your grid elements. That's the width and the height of your grid elements. But most of the time you're going to be using your grid colon, your grid auto row rather, because that helps you to manipulate the height. The rows help you manipulate the height. So if I do an 100 pixel here, you can see what it does. So it makes them 100 pixel high. There's really no reason why you want to. For me, well, as of now, I've not seen the reason to use grid auto colon if I'm going to be manipulating the width, because I mean that's why I'm doing grid template colon, to be able to help me align the width of the boxes well. So but grid auto row, why not? It helps you, as you've seen, it helps you set the height of each of the boxes in the grid. There's also another function. So say for example, let me give you a use case why this next function that I'm going to introduce, this is a function now, not a property, that I'm going to introduce makes sense to use. So let's say we have more content in this place. I'll show you the defect of grid auto row. So notice that my content spilled over. So you might not say, well, let me increase the gap. Let me increase the gap so you now, yeah. So notice that my content spilled over here. I necessarily do not want my column gap to be this much. So I'm going to, now that I really need to specify, I just want 10 pixel on my column, but on my rows I want 30 pixel. Yeah, so this is a scenario where gap is not suitable for you when you want different values. So notice this spillage. So my grid auto rows is not flexible. So once you give it a particular figure, it sticks with that figure. So the way you can sort this problem is by using what we call the min max property. So instead of doing this, you can use your min max property. So you can use your min max function. So what min max does is you give it, what it takes is, one, it takes the initial size and auto. Initial size and auto. So what auto means is if my content is bigger than this initial size, please help stretch the boxes. Help stretch the box so as to contain the contents given to it. So if I do an 100 pixel and I do an auto, yeah. So can you see that now? So it stretches the box to contain the content. So it's saying if the content is good enough to be contained by an height of 100 pixels, let it be 100 pixels. But if it is not, stretch it. And then I say it makes sense because it stretched all of the guys left and right with it, but the rest takes 100 pixels. The rest takes 100 pixels. So yeah, it's it's a beautiful kind of layout system to use. I mean, all of this is basically to give you power to be able to reproduce any form of layout. Yeah, all of this to give you power to be able to reproduce any form of layout. And before we wrap it up, I'm just going to introduce one or two more properties to you. And just like we have in Flexbox, we also have justify items here also. And you can do start. So what start does for you is it moves all of the content to the start. Um, so the first thing you will notice is that it takes away all the empty spaces that is not needed by the box, and that's why you see lorem ipsum shrinks to just the width of its content, and you see that this did the same as well. So we have start, we have end. To the other side, we have center, and by default we have stretch. You have stretch, and stretch is the default value, which is what you see. Stretch is default value. And we also have align item. So align item works for the horizontal view. Yeah. So you can have align item center. Yeah. You can also have align item starts. So it starts at the top. That's at the top. And you can have and comes down. So align item basically works for your horizontal view, while justify item works on your vertical view. So as I said previously, the reason why you need to know all this is because you never can tell where the area of application would be. So it is important for you to have them in your knowledge bank. So when there's an application for it, it would be a nice thing for you to do, to use. So we're going to be this brings us to the end of our CSS course. So what we're going to be doing next is I felt before we're supposed to be building this I am done. Let me see if I remember. Yeah, so this is what we're going to be building. So we're going to be putting together everything we have learnt from the beginning of HTML down to CSS. We're going to be putting everything together to build this portfolio website. But before we go into building this looks a bit much more. I felt a need to start small. Start small with you. We're going to build nothing less than 3 websites. It's HTML and CSS that we've learned. But we're going to be starting with this particular one. I feel this particular one is much more kind of easier than that. So we're going to be taking it gradually. And there's every possibility that this comes off next. So I'm going to build this and obviously drop the video so everyone can have access to watch. And I'm going to be building it obviously from the ground up with no preparation, so you can you can also see me make mistakes, see the way I sort out things and the my thought pattern when it comes to building things like this. And don't forget, the main essence why we're doing this is to help people who wants to get into the development environment. So the whole idea of this is helping them to catch up to speed, and they probably cannot afford the fees of code institution, or they are not just I don't know, for one reason or the other, they are not just code institutions are not just affordable for them, and they really need someone to help them escape through their hurdles of personal learning. This that is the reason why we're doing this. That's the reason why we're doing this. And we're putting up the courses in such a way that you can start from zero level, and you can end up being a full stack developer. That's the plan and that's the goal. And that's why we started from the beginning of the web. That's why we took it from the very onset, looked at what the web is, looked at servant client server architecture, and then we proceeded to HTML, dealing with HTML, and then we moved forward to CSS. Now we're capping it all up by building a site with everything we've learned. So at the end of the whole of this series, the goal is to make you a full stack engineer, make you a full stack developer, and all of this is for free. Yeah, it's for free. So you basically do not have any excuse to not become what you want to become. So yeah, I hope you guys have learned a lot, and I hope you're looking forward to the next video to come. I'm excited. I'm so excited about doing this. I'm excited about building this and putting it out there for you guys to keep learning. Yeah. So yeah, that'll be the end of it. Thank you very much and keep building.